Hi, everyone. It's Daniel Strauss here. I'm here with my colleague and partner in all things crime, Grace Segers. And today we are interviewing one of the biggest criminals, Jonathan Kott, former Joe Manchin spokesman extraordinaire. And now, what's your title?
Partner at Capitol Counsel.
Partner at Capitol Consulting. I've known John for many years. He's seen me at the bar, pestering him with questions, and we are very eager, especially in the past few days, to ask him about some legislative and campaign questions. I want to just start out though, John, because this seems to be the most popular one. Would you run for president if you had the opportunity, or governor of West Virginia? What do you think?
So I would not run for president personally.
Okay.
Don't like to fly. Don't really want to travel the country. Having heard Joe Manchin tell me how great being governor of West Virginia was, it is somewhat intriguing. But every time I go to West Virginia, I eat at Tudor's Biscuits and wind up gaining like 10 pounds in a weekend. So it's probably not best for me to do that either.
Okay, fair. Well, that's interesting. And if you don't mind me asking one follow-up question, so he was asked on the Sunday shows, if he will run for re-election, if he would run again for governor, or if he would run for president. And he said everything is on the table. Personally, in my career, I have always found former governors who go to the Hill hate it compared to their old job, and most lawmakers across the political divide have said how much they love being governor. I've actually read about a Governor Manchin chewing out the former University of Michigan football coach when he was at West Virginia University for his QB pick for Saturday. It's how likely do you think it is that he could run for governor again? He's also close with Governor Jim Justice, is that right?
Yeah, they've known each other for a while.
Yeah.
I take him at his word. This is what he did in 2018. He doesn't operate in the same way that I think a lot of other politicians do, that the day after the last election, he's now in cycle. He doesn't think he's in cycle until he actually has to file. So he's going to do what he's been doing the last 2 years. And at some point, he's going to have a bunch of conversations with West Virginians. He's going to sit down and talk with his family. He has a very large family. He loves his grandkids. There's nothing he enjoys more than going home and playing with the kids. So I think he'll do all of that. And then next year, he'll make his decision on what he wants to do and where he thinks he can best serve. I do think he's one of those people that legitimately wakes up, and I know this because he used to wake up and call me at 5 a.m. and say, "Hey, buddy, what can we get done today?" So that's always going to be part of who he is, and I don't think he can ever separate from that. So I think he'll figure out what's the best way he can serve, I think, first the people of West Virginia and then the country, and he'll go from there. But he's got my support in whatever he chooses. So
the Kott endorsement.
Something that I really noticed covering Manchin for the past couple of years, particularly during the Build Back Better negotiations, which were the bane of every reporter's existence. It was just terrible to cover day after day, this incremental progress. And there became a sort of cottage industry around Joe Manchin says this today, and then the next day, well, now he said this. And I found that if you ask him a question, he'll just answer it off the cuff. And people will take that as gospel of whatever he is definitely going to do, but really he's just kind of thinking out loud. So if you ask him, are you going to run for governor and or president? And he's like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. It just means he's thinking about it. Would you say that's an accurate assessment?
Yes, and he's brutally honest, which can sometimes be a great thing in politics, and sometimes it can be a horrible thing for staff who, doesn't always want all the information out there. But you are correct. If you ask him a question, he's going to answer it, and it's going to be brutally honest, and it's going to be how he feels at that moment.
Right. I did also, switching gears a little bit, want to ask about the big news of the day in terms of another Senate race. You have Ruben Gallego announcing that he is going to run against Kyrsten Sinema and as of yet undecided Republican candidate. So do you think that, well, first of all, do you think that Sinema is likely to run again, although guessing what she will do is really a guessing game. But then if we do have a three-way race, do Democrats have a chance of keeping that seat?
Yes, I think they definitely have a chance of keeping that seat, just given how far to the extreme Republicans in Arizona have gone in the last couple of elections. But I do think we will have an ideological battle in the Democratic Party, but also, seeing how far the independents and moderate Republicans stretch in Arizona and how willing they are to reach out and vote for either a Democrat or Senator Sinema, who's now an independent. But I think that will be something that we'll find out next year. I think she's going to have a great record to run on of accomplishments, and she's going to have to make the case to Arizonans that, look, no matter what my party affiliation is, sorry to be blunt, she gets shit done. So that's her mantra. It doesn't matter how she does it. She just gets results. And I think you've seen her and Senator Manchin work together on some, big issues because they just like to get stuff done and don't really care. Is there a D or an R? And I think famously, some of her best friends are Republicans and have been. That's not a new thing. That was who she was in the House. So I think she's going to have a lot of crossover appeal, but I think Ruben Gallego is a great candidate. He's got a great background. He had a great announcement today, and it's going to be a tough race, but that will show sort of the divide in the party.
Unless I missed something here, we haven't, and this is one of the bigger questions I have about this race and just the Democratic Party in general. Gun to your head, do you think the DSCC would back Sinema? There's a question because she did leave the Democratic Party. She's still keeping her committee assignments, whether the DSCC, the campaign arm of the Democratic Party, will offer her incumbent protection. And usually for our viewers who aren't as obsessed with this stuff as I am, it seems like a very insular thing, but it's very important. The committee helps match staff with a candidate to make sure they have capable people who know what they're doing. They will sometimes run an ad and funnel money to a candidate, and they will also, in the case of a primary challenge, strongly discourage consultants from working with a primary challenger. I have not seen or heard or gotten a response from the DSCC in response to this question. They do regard the two other independents who caucus with the Democrats, Angus King and, oh gosh, now I'm
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders as incumbents, although those primaries have never been, or those primaries have not been serious. I'm very eager to know what happens here. Gary Peters, the returning DSCC chair, does not seem eager to make an announcement on this question, which is why I want him to do it.
I think he will wait to see what Senator Sinema decides. I think he'll wait to see what she wants. She may say, look, I'm an independent, I'm on my own, I'm going to run my own race. You guys do whatever you feel you need to do. She is sort of that maverick in the McCain mold. So she may not want the endorsement or support. She may. That's going to be something she has to decide. But I don't think Gary Peters has to make that decision right now until we actually see how the race plays out. But you're right, with somebody like Angus King, another former governor, who will tell you there is nothing better than being governor of Maine. His races are a little different. So I think we'll just wait and see what happens. But again, I think she's also one of these people that, yes, she made the decision to switch parties, but we still have a full year before she's even in her election year, before she even needs to file. We're in January of 2023. She doesn't need to file, I think, until March of 2024. So she's got time to make up her mind, and thankfully so does Gary Peters.
Yeah, I was just thinking of another former governor who just joined the ranks of senators today, Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, who is now Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska. I'm sure he is soon to discover that which all former governors in the Senate learn, which is that being one in 100 is not nearly as fun as being like the god king of your own little fiefdom of your state.
Yeah, there used
God
to be
Emperor. Let's keep the
Yes.
nerdery up. John,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know anything about this, but from Dune, God Emperor.
I do not. I will tell you, there used to be, I think they still meet, there used to be a former governor's caucus in the Senate.
Yes.
And it was mostly a time to get together and complain about how great things used to be when they were governor. And Lamar Alexander was the dean. So he came in and everybody sort of,
I didn't even know he was governor of Tennessee.
Yeah, he was governor of Tennessee for a while. So he would come in, he would give his speech, and famously, Tom Carper would always say in the meeting, "My worst day as governor is better than my best day as senator." And they all sort of
this is a support group you're describing. You are describing an actual support group, like
Yes.
Former Governors Anonymous is what this should be called.
But I think what they all had in common was when you're a governor, especially in a smaller state, you can dictate the agenda and get stuff done in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So when you get to the Senate and you introduce a bill and your staff says, "That's great. In like a year, we'll get it through the committee. And in like 3 or 4 years, maybe we'll get a vote on the floor if you can get 60 co-sponsors and we can find, a bill to attach it to and it can ride on this provision." And they look at you like you're crazy because their entire lives, or for the last 8, 10, 12 years for some of them, they would say, "Okay, let's do this bill." Somebody would write it. They would go to the state legislature and they would get it done in tops 3 weeks. So it's foreign to them that this stuff lasts so long and takes so long, which is why I think you see a lot of them so frustrated.
Yeah, that must include state legislatures too. I've never actually thought about comparing the sausage making or the timeline for a bill in a state legislature to the federal government. That's really interesting. John, let's move a little bit toward the Hill right now. You've been in the room or behind a lawmaker during some of the most contentious fights in the country in the past decade. How optimistic are you at this point in time that the Biden administration can get anything done? And what are the signs of that? Especially, again, over the weekend, it was like a very newsy weekend. There's a new chief of staff. I don't know how consequential you think that is. And just that, Joe Biden is going to be running for re-election, so everything starts to overtly or covertly be related to that. How optimistic are you about anything? And finally, another data point in this, especially after the House of Representatives took so long and had so much trouble electing a new speaker.
I would say when Joe Biden was campaigning and he kept saying, "I can get to Washington and I'll work with these people," having seen how unwilling most of the time they were to work with a president of the other party, I was not optimistic. But watching everything that got done the last 2 years and actually being shocked at the list of accomplishments, and then seeing the White House send out their 2-year anniversary list and just being surprised that there were so many things on it, I do actually think there's room to get stuff done. Will it be as much as the last 2 years? No, there's no way. Because one, I don't actually think you could match those first 2 years. I think they were probably the most historic legislative 2 years in my lifetime. And I've worked in politics under 4 or 5 presidents. I do think you'll get something done on the Farm Bill. I think you'll get something done on FAA. I think they'll find some way to work together on something on energy. I think Senator Manchin has already said he's going to work to get his permitting bill done. I'm betting that he will get that done. But then I do think there will be a lot of smaller issues. They may not be the big, bold things, but I do think you're going to have a bunch of House Republicans who won in moderate districts that Joe Biden supported that want to come back next year. And if they want to come back next year in 2 years, they have to pass some stuff. And the one thing that all members like to do when they go home to campaign is have something to stand in front of or have something to tout. And if you don't actually have any legislative accomplishments, it makes it really hard to say, hey, you sent me to Washington and I didn't do anything, but send me back in 2 more years and I promise I'll get something done. Like, that's not a real great slogan to run on. So I do think they'll find some ways to get a few things done.
I guess I just wonder in that vein though, like, I don't know the answer to this question. Just like how eager, like what Republicans should take away from the midterm cycles. Like, because a lot of that gridlock is motivated by House Republicans looking back and saying, I will get primaried if I cooperate with Democrats. But this cycle, where they very barely regained control of the House, might message otherwise. I don't know how you, yeah.
But there's 18 of those House members that are in very blue Biden districts. And those are the people that I think you can reach out to. I think you have somebody like, my friend Josh Gottheimer already has a group of people who are willing to work across the aisle. I think that group is probably going to expand because they know they have to get a few things done. Also, they just want to come there. There are a lot of people who want to come there and govern. I know there are a lot of members who come and they love going on Twitter and they love going on TV, and that's actually why they're there. And there is a group of those people, but there is still a large majority that likes to legislate and wants to get stuff done. And I think you're going to see the White House reach out to them. They're going to be over at the White House tomorrow night, I think, for the new members reception. And I think you're going to see the old school Joe Biden make friends with a lot of these new members, and he's going to find a way to work with them and make sure they're able to get stuff done. And I think that's going to benefit everybody. I do think Hakeem Jeffries, not just because we're both from Brooklyn, but I think Hakeem Jeffries is going to find a way to be speaker in 2 years because of that, because he's going to show that they're willing to work together, they're willing to get stuff done, and Joe Biden's going to have another successful, 2 years.
So if I remember correctly, you were with Senator Manchin during Manchin-Toomey, the gun control negotiations, and I believe also during the immigration negotiations of 2013. So that's 10 years ago now, which is crazy. But I think just looking at where the House was and where Congress was 10 years ago compared to where they are now, it's not exactly as if they've gotten less extreme.
No, more extreme.
Right. So you're talking a good game of bipartisanship and working together, but we've seen through the speaker's vote that there's a good faction of conservatives who are willing to just hold things up.
Sure.
But you're not concerned about that getting in the way?
I'm definitely concerned about that getting in the way. I don't think you'll see the historic accomplishments, but remember, like, there was an infrastructure bill that we've been trying to get done for 15 or 20 years. That got a bunch of Republican votes. The CHIPS bill got a bunch of Republican votes. I do think you'll find some issues like that where you just need to show you're getting stuff done and you're passing bills. Just sending bills to go die in the Senate doesn't help members get reelected. So I do think you'll find one or two of those issues. But you're right. Look, when we were working on immigration, that got 67 votes in the Senate. It went to the House and died because Eric Cantor lost his primary. But yes, it's only gotten more extreme since that point. Do I think there's going to be an immigration bill? I do not. I would be very surprised. My old boss, Chris Coons, is still working on one. He's still, got a bipartisan group that gets together. They were down at the border. So I think the Senate is going to try to get something done, but that may be a bridge too far in the House. But, maybe there is something that they can compromise on and get a few things done.
There was yet another shooting over the weekend. Like, I'm very much disturbingly used to this. What about a gun bill? Like, could a gun bill happen? This is something that Senator Manchin over the years has been very moved in the shooting and motivated to try and pass some sort of compromise on. You shook your head a little bit as I was asking this question.
I am shocked that Chris Murphy and John Cornyn were able to get one done. So I'd be stunned if if anything else got done in the next, I mean, there should be, and we should be working on it. It's just become such a tough issue. And you see people like, Gabby Giffords championing this and like, almost giving her life for it. But I think it's become way more partisan than it needs to be. I mean, I used to tell people, when reporters would call after Manchin Toomey failed and we'd have another mass shooting and say, is he going to bring it up? And I would say, what makes this different? Please tell, like, we watched 21 babies get murdered and we didn't do anything. So please tell me why, 18 people in a shopping mall or, people in a nightclub or, people in a church makes it any different. I just think we've almost become desensitized to it, but I'd be lying if I said there was a high likelihood that something would get done.
So what would motivate a lawmaker to, like, at this point in time, to push any kind of gun bill or like support that or bring one up? Is there anything? Because like literally we're talking about shootings here.
Yeah. I mean, you have to believe that over time it will get done, right? Like when Senator Manchin worked on Manchin Toomey and it failed, the first thing he said to me on the walk back to the floor was, how do we get these other votes? Like, how can we, reintroduce this and get these other votes? And I think over those 10 years, that kind of laid the groundwork for the Murphy-Cornyn bill that got done. So I think, unfortunately, there is just this length of time and the arc of history that you hope bends towards, what you think is righteous. And if you're not introducing it today, there's no chance that it's going to get done in 5 years. If you wait 5 years, you're behind the game. So you have to start now.
I want to pivot a little bit to a decidedly unsexy topic, the debt ceiling, which I have written about many times. But Manchin was in Davos, Switzerland last week for the World Economic Forum. And he kind of deviated from the Democratic Party line, saying that he would be willing to negotiate with Republicans over raising the debt limit. And meanwhile, the Biden administration and House Democrats have been like, absolutely not, we're not going to negotiate. But Manchin basically said, yes, we would consider maybe negotiating with Republicans, and I would propose raising the debt limit along with creating rescue committees to look after Social Security and Medicare and other trust funds. So like I can feel people's eyes glazing over as I say this. But I was just wondering about your opinion on these debt ceiling negotiations. Are Democrats going to have to talk with Republicans? And is the proposal that Senator Manchin suggesting the right way to go about it?
I think he, always wants to do things in a bipartisan way. It's just his belief that, like, if you do things together, it looks better for the country and it looks better, like the world view of you is better. I think the CHIPS bill getting passed in a bipartisan way was the worst thing for China because it showed that it was like a united front. So I do think he's going to want to find ways to work in a bipartisan way. And he's, as he said, he's going to go meet with Speaker McCarthy and they'll have a conversation. I think it will grow from there as to what other people want to get involved, what people are willing to discuss. But I do think, like, yes, the debt ceiling is the least sexy thing you could talk about because it's literally just saying, are you going to pay for the money, like the bills for money you already spent, right? Like we already spent this. Donald Trump racked up 25% of the debt. We raised the debt limit 3 times under him. Like, let's just remember, we're just paying our credit card bill. As much as I don't want to pay my credit card bill each month, I don't have that option. I may reach out to Amex and Chase and see if they'll just lift my debt ceiling. But so I think you're just going to have to see how people come around to talk about this. But yes, it is something we should do it in a bipartisan way. We've done it in the past in a bipartisan way. We should raise the debt ceiling, but we should address spending, right? Like Joe Biden was right to eliminate student loan debt, but we should also talk about why college is so expensive And so we should just work on addressing those things. I don't think they need to be done at the same time, but Senator Manchin is one of the few people that, cares about the debt, cares about the deficit. We kept telling him it was not a sexy issue. It didn't poll well. And he kept saying, I don't care. I'm not going to leave this debt to my grandkids. I hate it and do everything I can to stop it. So this is just, a continuation of him being who he's been.
Right.
Or Grace, did you want to follow up on that?
No, go ahead.
I like to think of you as an expert on in the subset of the Democratic Party that are moderates. You dropped like Josh Gottheimer's name, and of course you worked for Manchin and others. One thing I wonder in general is like, what does a moderate think of this administration? And I would have put a Senator Biden among that crew.
Sure.
He definitely, there is a definite sense I've gotten that he feels super competitive with the last Democratic president to be the most progressive, but he never envisioned his like dream presidency was more deal making and moderation in a lot of ways. And he will probably go down as one of the more liberal Democratic presidents that we've had. I guess I just wonder, like, if you're a moderate, what are you thinking right now? And I just want to mention or highlight that there's a new super PAC, I think, that's starting to mobilize and raise $1 million or something like that to protect moderates. I think Axios reported on that last week. I guess if you could talk a little bit about that.
Look, I think moderates, I think moderates and progressives should be very happy with the Biden administration. I think there are some times that progressives were very upset, right? Like Bernie Sanders wanted Build Back Better to be $10 trillion. Then he compromised to $6.5 trillion. Then he wanted $3.5 trillion. And then, the moderates led by Joe Manchin got it down to much less and more focused. The progressives won on student debt relief. Like that's something they were pushing. So I think Joe Biden has almost been, a blessing to all of them, because no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, you can say, look at all that we got done. Now, I think progressives had a much bigger wish list agenda items than moderates had at the start of this administration. So they may be a bit more frustrated. But remember, I think people forget how hard of a job, yes, President Biden had, but Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer had barely, Chuck Schumer didn't have a majority at 50-50. Nancy Pelosi had a very small one. But Chuck Schumer has leadership meetings tonight that have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Manchin and Mark Warner in them. That's not the easiest group to corral and get behind one bill. Nancy Pelosi has Josh Gottheimer and, Pramila Jayapal. Like, that's not an easy group to get together. And they managed to do that on major issues. And they got a lot of stuff done. So I think each side should be a little bit happy that they got most of what they wanted done, not all of it. I think progressives might think they didn't get enough done, but look, that's how Washington works, right? If you can't get 50 or 60 on a lot of things, you can't get it done.
Yeah, you were just giving me flashbacks to the Build Back Better reporting. It was, God, what a horrible time to be a congressional reporter. But speaking of needing that whip count of 50 in the case of reconciliation or 60, do you think that the filibuster is going to come up again now that there are 51 Democrats in the Senate? And how do you think that will go down if there is another call for the filibuster to be eliminated?
I don't think Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are going to switch on that. I think they high-fived on it as a agreement in Davos.
What was that? Can we pause? Let's just, that's what I've been dying to ask today, John. Davos, Kirsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, high-fiving on we're not going to move on the debt limit.
No, the filibuster.
What's up with that? On the filibuster, sorry, not the debt limit.
I think, like I was saying about Joe Manchin, he does think we should do things in a bipartisan way. He just thinks it's better, and that's what he's always going to believe. I also think people need to remember he took Robert Byrd's seat. He carries around a pocket constitution because Robert Byrd did it. That's who he learned how the Senate should work from. So that's just what he believes is the best way this institution should operate. And clearly Kristen Sinema does as well. I would say there was a letter signed a few years ago by a number of Democratic senators and Republican ones who said they were never going to eliminate the filibuster. So I don't know how excited everybody is to eliminate the filibuster. I think senators believe that it works best when they work together on these things. But until there's 52 or 53, I don't see this changing.
If I'm a pro filibuster reform Democrat who's been in the Senate the last 6 years, sure, I'm like, let's do it, guys. Let's run with this as long as we can. Because I wouldn't have thought if I were a Democratic senator that they would still retain control of that chamber till now. So like, why not? I guess
because I think their fear is what happens when they're not in control of that chamber, and what happens when they don't have the White House and Congress.
Right.
And that's the fear.
Right.
I will just note for posterity that Robert Byrd was very famous for completing a filibuster against civil rights legislation. Sure. So I'm not saying that Senator Manchin is following in those particular footsteps, but just to note, Robert Byrd had a very long and very, I guess, eventful career.
How does, I need to go over this, but like how, if you are opposed to filibuster reform, how do you respond to an example like that, where there is some legislation that some sort of urgent climate bill or something that would need to pass? It makes so much sense, but there is a Jim Inhofe in the Senate who doesn't believe, who's throwing snowballs on the Senate floor in the summer, I think it was, or something like that. Like, how do you square that?
I mean, I think
we're not the spokesman for all moderates ever.
No, I think he finds a way to, he goes to his former governors on the Republican side, gets 4 or 5 of them together, and then starts working on it. I mean, he's managed to do it on a number of issues. So I'm always shocked that, he's so optimistic and keeps trying, but he keeps being successful. So I see why you would, I gamble on football. I'd lose a lot. If I was winning, I'd keep doing it all the time. He keeps managing to get successful legislation passed with 10 Republicans. Now, those that number is shrinking with the retirement of a lot more moderates, but it's just going to make the job harder. But I think for him, it makes him work even harder. I mean, I also work for Chris Coons, who constantly meets with Republicans and is constantly finding ways to get 1 or 2 issues that they can agree on and pass pieces of legislation, because they both worked on it for a number of years and it means something to them, right? Like, he famously used to go on foreign trips with Jeff Flake, and that's how they became really good friends. And I think that's what led to Jeff Flake being comfortable with him to say during the height of the Kavanaugh hearings, which was, madness, that let's take a break. I can trust my good friend Chris Coons, and let's let this FBI investigation play out for a week. I think it's stuff like that where it leads to bipartisan agreement. I mean, Chris Coons worked with Todd Young, he worked with John Cornyn. He's worked with a lot of them. So I think the moderates just do a better job of building relationships on the other side of the aisle. And then you find 1 or 2 issues that you can say, oh, let's work on this together.
Can you make a little news here or surprise us here? Like, who is the Republican senator that you wouldn't expect that is amenable to work with for Democrats?
That is amenable?
Who's the one the name that wouldn't come up, who's not like a Susan Collins or a Lisa Murkowski, but really in those back rooms, really on Joe Manchin's boat, you might be able to hammer out something. Oh, I think John knows. He just is wondering if he should say it.
Well, I mean, in the last Congress, it was Richard Burr. Richard Burr loved working in a bipartisan way. I think you see a lot of that out of Shelley Capito. Like she's just somebody who quietly behind the scenes gets a lot of deals done. Trying to think down the Republican side. Todd Young, well, no, John Cornyn. John Cornyn,
yeah.
I mean, he is affectionately, for obvious reasons, Big John. And a lot of his Democratic colleagues like working with him because they know he comes to the table and actually just wants to get something done. He doesn't there's no theatrics to him. You don't see him on TV a lot. He's just somebody who likes to sit down and say, okay, let's get something done. Actually, the other one is Mike Rounds.
Mike Rounds from South Dakota?
Yep.
So if you're okay, so looking ahead here, I'm sorry, Grace, I'm gonna shut up after this. But one day Mitch McConnell will not be caucus leader. I don't know when that's gonna be. Are you the two names that are often bandied about to succeed him are John Cornyn and John Thune. If you're a Democrat, are you actually secretly a Senate Democrat, Senate Democrat aider on the Hill? Are you secretly rooting for John Cornyn?
Probably. I mean, John Thune will also work with you, but John Cornyn has done this a lot and has a record, and he's likable, he's trustworthy, and he's willing to hear your side of it. So I think those are things that come together. And look, Johnny Isakson was somebody who famously loved to work across the aisle. Chris Coons took over the Johnny Isakson Georgia barbecue solely so that he could he brings up barbecue.
I am not eating Delaware barbecue, man.
No, it's not Delaware barbecue. It's Georgia barbecue. But they come up from Georgia, and the only rule of it is it's in the Kennedy caucus room is you have to sit with somebody from the other party. And I think this year he got 90 senators to come along and do that. And he's sort of building off the Isakson legacy, but that's what you have to do. You have to find little times to work together, sit down and just get to know the person and say, what do you care about? Why'd you come here? I mean, Coons did it with Tom Tillis. They love IP law. I could not tell you anything about it. They love it. They're both passionate on it. They both work on it, and they get stuff they actually get bills passed on it. But unless you sit down and say hey, tell me something about yourself, you would never think that the two of them would get together on intellectual property.
So Georgia Barbecue Day and Seersucker Day are two of my favorite bipartisan traditions on the Hill. I will also just note real quick, and then I will turn to an actual question. But there are three Johns who are generally considered in the running for Republican leadership, and that is John Thune, John Cornyn, and John Barrasso of Wyoming.
Oh yeah, you're right.
The Johns are a very powerful bloc in the Republican caucus.
They're 10% of all senators are named John, as I have noted.
Sorry, Kott, I gave you Thune and Cornyn. Would Barrasso be in there, or are you sticking with your Cornyn preference?
I think Cornyn would be from Democrats, but look, Barrasso, Manchin and Barrasso have worked well on the Energy Committee, so I think they can find some ways. But John Cornyn has a long history of it. By the way, I don't know that this is actually helpful to John Cornyn for me to be saying it, but he is somebody.
Probably not.
But he is somebody who they genuinely trust and like working with.
I think of Cornyn and Barrasso as much more conservative than Thune, who is already pretty conservative.
Sure, but that's one of the reasons they trust him, is that they know he is so conservative and he's not going to compromise on his beliefs, but he is willing to find ways that you can work together if there's areas you agree on.
Right.
So you mentioned two senators who have been known for working in a bipartisan manner, Senator Portman and Senator Burr. They are, of course, retired now. They have been replaced by Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio and Senator Ted Budd of North Carolina. So you have this influx of more conservative members in the Senate, as you do in the House, of course, to a smaller scale. But do you think that having a Senator Vance instead of a Senator Portman could get in the way of some of that bipartisan wheeling and dealing that you were just talking about.
We'll have to see. I mean, I think people campaign in one way and govern in another way. And, when Senator Vance gets the opportunity to come here and talk to his colleagues, and he'll have to decide what type of senator he wants to be. I mean, there are, you get to the Senate and there you have a lot of options, right? You could be a firebrand who just goes on TV and goes on Twitter a lot and says a lot of fun, quotable lines, or you can be somebody who just puts their head down and gets a lot of stuff done. And there's, some who are in the middle. I mean, I'll tell you, like Liz Warren is somebody who behind the scenes gets a lot of stuff done and is a conduit and somebody that people trust. You wouldn't expect that, but she is.
I also, and then I will shut up, just wanted to run by you my personal theory of the Senate, which I think I may have run by you before, but I will do so again. It's how senators serve on a spectrum, where on one end are people who actively hate being there. And you see them in the hall and you're like, dude, why are you here? You clearly hate this life so much. And then on the other hand, on the other end are people who are going to die there in the Senate. They love it, eat, live, and breathe it. They will be senators for the rest of their lives. And so I've always thought, looking at your two bosses, that Senator Manchin would be more in the middle of that, because I think he enjoys some elements of the Senate, but
like the spotlight.
Yeah, yes. But he also misses being a governor. And I would say that Senator Coons, while not being fully on the going to die in the Senate side, would be closer to more of a Senate lover. Do you think that's an accurate assessment?
Sure. I think it's, yeah, I think Senator Coons loves legislating. Like, he loves knowing everything about an issue, digging deep into it, having 2-hour conversations with an expert on something, taking a 50-page white paper home on the train to Delaware and reading it, peppering his staff with questions about, what about this? What about this? His staff actually gets excited about like running bills to the floor. You could actually, I used to see some of them running bills to the floor, and they were so excited to drop a bill. And I'm not saying Senator Manchin's staff wasn't, but like and because Senator Coons just loves actually passing legislation and seeing things get done. Senator Manchin is the same way, but he loves to be in the middle of every issue and debate because that's the governor in him. He wants to, they're like two people are going to work in a bipartisan way. Great. Let me get involved in this and let's get this done, and let's get it done tomorrow. So I think the two of them, are, probably in that realm. But I also feel bad for the ones that hate being there, because like you could imagine like having to fly home to North Dakota every Thursday and come back Monday. That's a long trip. That's just exhausting on your body. And you do it, every week, 30, 40 weeks out of the year. And then you come here and, it's a tough job.
Okay, but first of all, they get Fridays off. They leave Thursday afternoon, make a good salary, good benefits, and they get the month of August off. So I'm not that sympathetic to them.
I will just say this. The Fridays off are Fridays off from DC. When they go home, there's 5, 6, 7 events, meetings, constituent, affairs they handle Saturday and Sunday. Most of them are out at multiple events. And then Monday, depending on when your flight comes back, you'll do 1 or 2 events and get on a plane, or you don't have time because your plane leaves at 5 a.m. So yes, I know a lot of people think, they get these times off. August, yeah, they go home in August and they do events nonstop, because there is nothing that the state staff loves more than planning the entire month of August with all the events that they didn't get to the rest of the year. And they just go from there. Plus, there's a state fair that almost every state has a state fair in August, and every member is there.
All right.
So it's a good job. but they do work hard.
Have you native New Yorkers gone to the New York State Fair?
I did not know there was a New York State Fair until
I don't know.
was in
I'm just
DC.
guessing. Great.
It's in
There is a New York State Fair, yes.
it's in Syracuse.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was in Saratoga, but I guess that's because it sounds like Syracuse. So clearly I've never been to the New York State Fair.
I've been to the West Virginia State Fair 6 or 7 times, and it was the best day of the year for me every year. I'm pretty sure I gained 5 pounds. The second we got there, I got a corn dog and homemade apple cider donuts, and Senator Manchin and I walked around the fair, and he loved it. So
I have a few to close out, John, unless you have any more serious questions, or you guys want to go 3 rounds on whether federally elected lawmakers have an easy life or a hard life. Speak now, but then I have a lightning round because I don't think you have a cat or a dog as a pet, John. Are you pro cat or pro dog?
I'm a dog lover and foster dogs and rescue dogs.
What I like to hear. Oh yeah, you foster. Is there one thing we like to do in the run up is highlight shelters that are doing good work? Is there a shelter that you foster often from?
No, I mean I love pit bulls, so anytime there's a pit bull that I can take in and foster, I will do that. And sometimes they come from, Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky. I think a lot of it has to do with when there's a natural disaster, they come in.
All right, I got 3 lightning round questions. I thought you were going to say no to pets, so that surprised me. One, our editor, Mike Tomasky, is a native West Virginian, who has told me that the pepperoni roll is the indulgence of choice for West Virginians. Are you pro or anti pepperoni roll?
I love a pepperoni roll. You should not eat that many of them.
Okay.
But they're nothing,
exactly what they sound like.
Yeah, there's nothing that will help you get through a 3 a.m. vote-a-rama like a pepperoni roll. So
okay. Second question. Grace and I don't really understand sports ball, but what was the big upset from this weekend? What were you most upset about? Who's gonna win the Super Bowl?
I'm a Jets fan, so I am constantly upset anytime the playoffs start because there's no chance that the Jets are going to be in it. I do have a bet with 2 of my friends. One of them is an Eagles fan. The other is a Chiefs fan. I don't think either of them are going to make the Super Bowl. I think it's going to be the Bengals and the 49ers, and be very excited about that.
Wait, there was a football game that was upset over the weekend? Okay.
There were upsets? Yeah, there were.
Okay, cool.
All right, last question, John, because you have a magnificent looking arsenal of fine liquors on the shelf. What are you most proud of? What's your drink of choice?
Tequila. I've actually been to Tequila, Mexico, just got back from Oaxaca, which is where they make mezcal. And most people don't know, to be tequila, you have to actually come from Tequila, Mexico, much like champagne. So I do love sipping on tequila, and most of the ones behind me, it's either a tequila or a bourbon. But some of the tequilas, if you age them for 8 or 10 years, are sweet and turn out to be brown water like bourbon.
Ah, did not know that. I'm going to hand it to Grace, closing us out.
Yes, I have 2 more just kind of rapid fire questions. Number 1, remind me where you are from in Brooklyn.
I grew up in Flatbush.
Right. I, for those who do not know, am originally from Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen, grew up there and on Long Island. And then second question for you, I always like to know what people are reading. And generally, if you're reading something for fun, that's what I want to know. Sometimes I ask that question and people are like, I read The Economist. It's like, okay.
Yeah, give us a real read.
Yeah, give us what you're actually reading. If you're actually reading The Economist, I'm sorry.
No, none of this like The Three Musketeers is really great. Or
actually is a great book, though. That's a great book.
It's a good book. Okay, latest, I don't know, David Foster Wallace is really a page turner.
I finished a book The Bronx is Burning about New York in the 70s, and I'm waiting to get my book on the 86 Mets, which should be theatrical and drama filled, and they were an insane group, but the only time I've ever seen a championship in my life, so I will read anything about the 86 Mets.
Are you still a Mets fan? Sorry, that's a third question.
Yeah, you can't, like, I'm pod committed at this point. Like, I can't change teams. I'm like, I think as a Jew from Brooklyn, like, we just suffer in general, and we suffer through our sports teams. And the Mets, Jets, and the Knicks have provided me years of suffering. Oh, I just will throw out, because I didn't have a shelter, I do go out to Poplar Springs Animal Farm, which is a sanctuary farm in Poolesville, Maryland. They take in all animals, cows, sheep, horses, whoever. I do have a foster pet out there, Josie. She's a blind, deaf sheep. She loves animal crackers and grapes. So if you want to get out and take care of some rescue animals, Poplar Springs is great.
Okay. Well, that's great. Jonathan Kott, thank you so much for your time today on the Run Up Live. We are TNRing live Arama this week. We have a series of events tomorrow and in the coming days. I hope you will join us. We are in the midst of inviting more guests. We are very happy about this, so please tune in again. Thank you so much, John.